How's everyone doing? So we have a very interesting session today, and most of us have heard of the iconic jewelry house Cartier, and we have the lovely Francesca with us today. Guys, am I audible? Can I get a thumbs up from people if I'm audible? Yes, Mukesh, the wait is over. I know everyone's been waiting for this session, and finally I could get Francesca online for this today. So it's in fact great for all the people who happen to miss the book signing in India. So I've sent a request to Francesca.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How's your day been? How's it up there?
It's nice. It was a ridiculously wet and stormy weekend in the south of France, which is not ideal for May. But now the sun is out. So
it must be feeling great to be in the sun.
yeah. What was it like there?
It's really humid in Bombay.
Is it?
And overall India, the weather is, some of the places it started to rain, but otherwise it's really humid up here.
Right. Yeah, not so good.
So I see a lot of people joining in. So guys, everybody has over here knows about the book Francesca just wrote, which is The Cartiers, and I must begin by thanking her for all the effort that she has put in to carry on the family legacy. And I'm going to formally introduce Francesca to everyone. So Francesca Cartier Brickell is the direct descendant of the Cartier family. Her great-great-great-grandfather founded Cartier in 1847. Her grandfather, George Cartier, was the last of the family to own and manage a branch of the world-famous jewelry firm. Francesca and I met in 2017, and early this year, in January 2020, I had the opportunity to host a book signing for her in Mumbai, along with Penguin India and at the Tidal Waves bookstore. So, Francesca, thank you so much for making the time for all of us and joining us here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm grateful.
Pleasure is all ours. So, tell me, you've researched so much on the book, and you've it's taken you years, and you've carried on the family legacy. What inspired you to write the book, and can you tell us how was your experience when you penned down this entire history?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had, my grandfather obviously worked at Cartier. He ran the Cartier London branch, but he actually retired before I was born. So I didn't really grow up, immersed in the Cartier in the Cartier business or knowledgeable about it particularly. But then, as I describe in the introduction of my book, on his 90th birthday, which was about 10 years ago, I was looking for a bottle of champagne in his cellar, and I failed to find the champagne, but I did discover this trunk of long lost family letters, which dated back like 150 years. And there's a photo of the three Cartier brothers and their father Alfred, and basically they told the story of people like in your photo, those black and white ancestors of mine that, I've grown up seeing these black and white ancestors in photos around the house, but they never really meant anything to me. They were two-dimensional characters, and then suddenly with this trunk of letters, they were letters between the brothers, between the brother and the father and their grandfather, and I suddenly kind of heard their voices, and I mean, even I understood their sense of humor and their fears and their loves and their passions and their, annoying qualities. Oh, I don't know if annoyingness is qualities, but annoying traits. And I felt like I couldn't just put them back in that trunk again because they'd become real people to me. So that really inspired me to kind of start on the journey. But then once I got going, I used far more than that trunk of letters. That was the starting point. But then I traveled all over the world, like trying to research different perspectives to the story, because I didn't want it to just be, obviously everyone has their own version of events. And I wanted to understand how it had been for others in the Cartier story as well, and also the kind of social history, what had been going on at the time. Because I think it's all very well reading a letter where the brothers are terrified about the business not surviving. But then when you look at the date of that letter and you realise it's 1930s and the Great Depression is happening and, you know, no one's got any money, then it kind of makes a lot more sense. Or the same during the First World War or during the French Revolution. So I kind of wanted to understand that whole context. And I also just travelled around interviewing as many people as I could related to that history or experts in that field. So it was quite a big task, and it was a pretty daunting task as well. But I was lucky enough to have my grandfather still alive when I discovered the letters, and I went through them with him. And he was such a wonderful man, and so modest and generous with his time. And, you know, he would never want to put himself in the limelight, but he was interested, you know, that he was keen that his ancestors wouldn't be forgotten for who they'd been. So I kind of promised him to keep that story alive. And that kind of kept me going. After he passed away a few years ago, I kind of thought, well, I made him this promise, I've got to deliver. So that kept me going.
How lovely. So tell me, I mean, you must have had so many memorable moments that you spent with your grandfather. Can you tell us a little about that? I'm really very excited to know about that.
Sure. Well, this picture that you've just shown, I just have to say I love this picture. This is Jack, who's my grandfather's father. When he was like 27 years old, he went to India for the first time, and that's him at the Delhi Durbar. And he wrote there about watching the polo matches every afternoon, and he sat next to the different Maharajahs at the different matches. And I think on that day he sat next to the Maharajah of Baroda he wrote about, and they talked a long time. And then the Maharajah of Baroda asked him to his palace after that polo match. So it's like great. You know, having his diaries and having the photo and putting the two together is so much fun.
I can imagine.
but I'm digressing. So that was my grandfather's father. My grandfather, so I never knew him because he died way before I was born. But my grandfather was, he was such a wonderful man. He was, as I said, very modest, very humble. You wouldn't know he'd run a big jewellery firm. He was like an artist and an introverted artist. You know, he found it draining being around a lot of people. You know, he loved being around his family or, you know, small groups, but he was happiest. I remember when we used to visit him growing up as children, he was happiest in his garden. He lived in the south of France. In fact, I live in the house where he lived in.
How lovely.
This is where I wrote the book. Yeah, so he loved gardening and he loved his family and his grandchildren. Because he was an artist, he was always sketching things, you know, little animals or the flowers, or it was amazing. As a kid, that's amazing. Someone who can just pick up a scrap of paper and a pencil and create an animal in air. Yeah,
a sign of a true artist.
Yeah.
So tell us, I mean, you know, the family has obviously created such great history. There must have been some kind of business ethics that the family always practiced and, you know, which are still relevant probably even today. What, according to you, is the secret for their success?
Yeah, I mean, this was interesting through the letters because it was, you know, Cartier was in the family for 4 generations. So that's a lot of different kind of social changes, and especially for a jewelry firm, because the clients kind of totally changed over that time. You know, they were serving the kind of the Russian Romanov clients were some of the biggest clients in the early years. And then, of course, there was the Russian Revolution, and then they were selling their jewels back to Cartier. And then the Maharajahs became the big clients, and then with Indian independence, that changed. So it's definitely up and down in terms of their client and the environment. And yet, you're right, those ethics, those kind of core family values really stayed the same. And that's what I found so interesting in the letters. Like, there was a really, really early letter, which was... I think in like 1870, where the founder, who was my great-great-great-grandfather, wrote to his son an advice. So his son was travelling to England with jewels to sell, and the advice his father wrote to him was, be very kind. Like, be very kind to everyone. It doesn't matter who they are, no matter what their position, be very kind. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's always the way I remember my grandfather, you know? And I think that was an important trait. And even Grandpa said in Cartier London, when he was running Cartier London, they had, in his time and in his father's time, they had a doorman who looked like Father Christmas. And he was like this lovely old man with a huge smile, and he greeted everyone, you know, smiling and laughing. And apparently everyone who walked into the shop was put in a good mood instantly. And Grandpa said, you know, that's the whole point. Like, people don't buy jewels unless they're feeling happy. So that kind of being very kind logic was the way they were, but it turned out to be, you know, good for business as well. But what else? I mean, the big creative motto was never copy, only create, which was the idea that they should take inspiration from everywhere except for existing jewelry. So I mean, these books behind me here, which is my great grandfather's library, there are literally no books really on jewelry. They're all on different things, like Indian fabrics, Chinese pottery. I mean, I don't know, historical ornament, Japanese sculptures. I mean, everything apart from jewelry. And they just took ideas from different cultures, you know, the Chinese dragons. And so they're fascinating to look through, because my great-grandfather has kind of written notes in the margin about how a motif in a vase might be transferred to a diamond tiara, or how, you know, there are pictures of I've shown before, kind of wrought iron balconies in Paris, and how that, you know, that shape became, you know, a tiara. So I think that was a really interesting motto. And I think another one, I mean, was just another kind of ethic, business value, was the fact that they were very pragmatic. They were always up for changing, you know? So if the environment suddenly changed, and, you know, as I mentioned, the Russians were their big clients, and suddenly they weren't there anymore, they didn't just throw their hands in the air. They're like, okay, well, where do we focus on next? You know, and they all kind of got together and they thought, right, America's the next big place. Right, we need two out of the 3 brothers in America now, because that's where we need to grow. So 2 of the brothers went over to America to really boost the business over there. And then when America was boosted enough and England was doing well, then one of the brothers went back to England. So they were kind of quite flexible, you know, they weren't stuck in their ways. And I think finally something which I found interesting, and I think this is something that the very first Cartier realized, the founder, because he had started and he'd taken out debt to buy the business, to found Cartier. He'd taken out debt. And then there was a revolution the year after he basically founded Cartier. The timing was awful. And he was terrified that the business wouldn't survive. And he owed all this debt. And so I think that really changed the way he thought about debt. And certainly between letters between him and his sons, and what my grandfather told me as well, was that their policy was really to be very financially prudent, you know, not to expand too much. They had branches in London, Paris, New York. Jack, there, my great-grandfather on the screen, he wanted to open a branch in India, but his father and brothers didn't want him to. They said, no, it's too risky to have a branch there the full time. You know, you go out. And the same with Russia. They wanted to open a branch in Russia. The middle brother did, but they decided it was too risky. So, so they were kind of financially prudent, which I think meant, you know, they survived those downturns. Yeah.
I think you've made a very important and interesting point, especially for the designers, is that they took inspirations not from jewelry, but from other artifacts and other forms of designs. But essentially, jewelers today or designers first look up to jewelry as an inspiration, which is so you know, it's so different from what the thinking was altogether back then. And exactly. I think the other important point that you made was, even if they built their business from a debt, but they did not expand further until they made this as a profit-making one.
Exactly.
So I think these 2 are very important points what people must know.
Exactly. And I'm sure they did take out, you know, small amounts of debt along the way, but it was just every decision they took, it was very well thought out. They all discussed it together. They didn't just kind of decide to take out debt on a whim, you know. It was kind of calculated risk.
So it was a collective decision which was taken, and not just a sole decision.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is like you asked about those ethics and those values. I think because it was this kind of tight family, they shared the same values. So I think that was really important. Even though they had brothers in London, Paris, New York, and one of them went off to India, one went to Russia, you know, and they didn't have the internet, obviously. They couldn't, you know, Instagram, WhatsApp, email. They couldn't contact each other, you know, that quickly, apart from telegrams. It's like a few lines. But they had to really, they wanted to run the same business in those different cities. You know, they wanted a client who walked into Cartier Paris to understand that it was the same store. Okay, not exactly the same, you know, as Cartier London, as Cartier New York. They had to have the same feel. Even if the jewels were slightly different, they had to understand they were in the same establishment with the same focus on quality and the same reputation and the same discretion. And so I think that was important, that the family, you know, Alfred, who was the three brothers' father, he said, there can only ever be 3 branches because I've only had 3 sons. Yeah. So I don't want anyone else running a branch, because anyone else, however brilliant they may be, they won't share the same, they haven't been brought up with the same family values. Those 3 boys were brought up together in, you know, not in a rich upbringing. They lived above the shop, you know, before it was in 13 Rue de la Paix. They lived above the kind of the earlier, less smart shop of Cartier, when it was still a relatively small Parisian jeweler. So they grew up quite, you know, sharing everything, and that was really important to, I think, the future success. Yeah.
That's a very important point that you made. I think even as business people should definitely look up to all the ethics and values that they shared, and in fact you are also sharing with us. So moving further, while you were writing your book, you spent a lot of time in India, especially researching here and traveling across the globe. Tell us about some of your most memorable moments in India.
Well, I was lucky because I had like this is my great-grandfather's diary to India in the 1920s, one of his diaries. And so basically he tells me where he went, you know, and what it was like when he arrived. So he says when he arrived in Mumbai, he arrived by boat, and it was like Mumbai appeared like a veiled lady with a kind of cloud of smoke around it. And then when you got inside, you could see the blue sky. And it was phenomenal because I obviously didn't arrive by boat, but, you know, just driving taxi from the airport, I knew what he meant. I saw that haze, you know, it was 100 years later, but I saw the same thing. And then I've also, you know, as well as his diary, he's got like all these receipts, like this is the Taj Mahal, Bombay.
Maybe you want to hold it a bit higher so we'll be able to see it. Oh, that is so cool. Yes.
Taj Mahal, Bombay, and all their kind of spendings, tea or coffee, aerated water, all the washing they did,
cool.
you know, the kind of hotel bills basically. So I could kind of go to the same places and also just kind of track down some of the same, because in India, some of the same families that he'd known, because in India, which is phenomenal and amazing, is that families and businesses do stay in the family for so many generations.
Yes.
So whereas in the West, the people that he'd known don't tend to be in the same business in our generation now. In India, they do tend to be in the same business still. So
absolutely, yes.
That was phenomenal. So to meet those jewelry dealers, or, you know, and gemstone experts, and, you know, they were trained from their forefathers, and they knew stories about Cartier that had been passed down to them. So that was really exciting. And then, so I mean, I went all over, and he also went to, let me show you some more pictures. He went, can you see that Rolls Royce?
Oh my God, that is so amazing.
So they traveled around India in the Rolls Royce. I didn't, they did, with their chauffeur, and my grandfather and his wife, my great-grandmother. That's
oh my God, that is so amazing. I have that picture. I'm going to put that up right now.
That is in that one is from here, the Palace Jamnagar.
Oh yes, in Gujarat, Jamnagar in Gujarat.
So that's from there, where they were very close to the Maharajah. So, but I went to Baroda. So in the diary, he talks about going to Baroda.
Baroda, yes.
Yeah, and
so the Lakshmi Vilas. I remember you also visited the Lakshmi Vilas Palace.
Yes, which was phenomenal, and to just kind of share stories about the history and to see, just it's incredible just to walk where he had walked, you know, and he described the palace being so beautiful, and it's it decorated with such, you know, the Maharajah, the Gateway, had such an incredible artistic eye, and he described about how every corner of it was beautiful, and so it was very special to kind of see that and see exactly what he'd been talking about, and obviously to meet those there now and to share those stories. And I went to Kapurthala, I went up to the Punjab, and then most recently I went to Jaipur for the literature festival as well. But that was special because obviously that being the gem, you know, the gem capital, and seeing all of that, all that history. So I mean, I loved it. Yeah, I felt very connected to him there, because he often talked about how he was in such admiration of India and how their history and culture was the most fantastic in all the world, and he was so inspired by the motifs and the colors, and you know, he found the people so cultured and interesting, and you know, generous. So yeah, it was very, I mean, I really I wasn't expecting to love it so much. I don't know what I was expecting. I was just kind of going on another research trip, but then I kind of totally got it. Yeah,
That's amazing. So I'm going to play a little video that you shared with us about the India tour.
Oh yeah. Do you have the sound? No.
Do you have the sound on?
I can't hear it. That's okay. It's just music. What else? Oh, I can't hear it.
Everyone's asking for the sound.
Technology. Well, for anyone who's interested, I've just kind of started a YouTube channel. Just YouTube Francesca Cartier Brickell, and I have this video on it.
I'm just gonna put it away. Yeah. So we see a lot of questions asking about where can they see this video. Francesca has posted this on YouTube, and we will share the link so that everybody can hear the sound. I believe on Instagram we couldn't hear the sound right now, so you guys can watch it over there.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful video, Francesca.
Oh.
Sorry, you were saying something.
No. Well, I've done about 5 little videos about different parts, like a bit of the behind the scenes of the book. About one of them is about the kind of the inspiration they used. You know, I was talking about the books before, and I show some of those in the video, and that one's about India and Sri Lanka, and so. But they're very short; they're like 2.5 minutes. So if you're interested, you can sign up to the YouTube, and I'll be putting more and more things on there as well as I get more into this technology lark, as one has to in 2020. Yeah.
That's amazing. So when you actually visited India, tell me some of the things that really fascinated you about India, and what were your key takeaways when you came to India?
Well, I found it, you know, phenomenal. I mean, it'd be obvious to you, of course, but like, I didn't think I'd really clicked about how, well, I knew how enormous it is from seeing it on a map, but just traveling around to the different places that Jack had been. And when I was lucky, I could fly between the places. You know, he tried to travel by train or Rolls Royce, and when the road had been tricky on a Rolls Royce, you know, when they'd encountered a stream or something, he said the locals had helped by kind of building a raft, and they put the whole Rolls Royce on the raft and got it across the stream. And when they went to, you know, this is in Nepal, but when they tried to cross the Himalayas, they couldn't drive over the mountains, so they basically took the entire car apart, and apparently they were carrying like a car door and a car wheel and the steering wheel all separately over the mountains. And then when they got to see the King of Nepal, they kind of put it all back again and drove off. It's phenomenal. So that was interesting to kind of really understand just how, not only how big it is, but how different each area is. I mean, it's like they're like different countries. I mean, it's like Europe, I guess, isn't it, rather than one country. So I was in, this time I was in like, went to Jaipur, and then I was in the Punjab for like a couple of days, and then the next day I was down in Kerala, and they were like, it's so different.
Wow. Yes.
So different.
Absolutely.
But wonderful. And I took my kids, which was very special because they kind of absolutely loved it. And it was kind of mind-blowing for them, you know. It's so different, and it's so, I can't imagine it now in lockdown because it's so vibrant, isn't it? And energetic and busy and colourful. And I mean, we live in the French countryside. Sometimes don't see anyone for days. So
Mumbai actually feels like it was back in the 1800s. The entire
really?
city feels like that because it's so quiet and there's absolutely no cars, no people, no pollution. So I'm sure it's the same way in all the other cities in India and globally the same way.
Gosh, because when I came, because you organised the best book launch, Prinder, the amazing book launch, because she also organised it in about 3 days, didn't you? Like, it was so last minute. She offered to do it. It was brilliant. And I hadn't even thought about doing a book launch in Mumbai. I just was going to the Jaipur Literature Festival in my head, and I hadn't thought about it, but then we added it on. But I remember I literally got there to the airport. There I am. Arrived in Mumbai at the airport, and then I had to be there like an hour and a half later, and I thought it was plenty of time. But the traffic,
it's crazy.
The traffic. Yeah.
I totally remember that day, the moment we were waiting for you, and the moment you entered the room, there was like silence altogether. Everyone's like, she's arrived and let's just get started.
At last. Sorry everyone for keeping you waiting.
No, I can imagine the Mumbai traffic, so we all could get that, you know, by Uber. So now let's talk a little about what you're drinking today. We haven't asked you that. I'm drinking an Americano, and that's how I like my coffee, like really strong. Tell me a little about what you're drinking this evening.
Okay, I would have Americano in the morning, but if I have it now, I will never sleep. So I don't have it now. Now I'm very English, and I'm having just a cup of tea. In fact, and I realised as I made this cup of tea, this mug, I don't know if you can see it, it says, "Go away, I am writing." It's back to France, but it says, "Go away, I am writing." And my kids got it for me in the Jaipur Literature Festival, because for basically two years I didn't see my kids. I was just always shooing them out the way as I was writing this book.
So talking about Jaipur, actually, this mug is designed by my first cousin who lives in Jaipur, and she hand makes these.
Oh wow!
Peacock. Yeah.
Lovely.
So moving further, tell me a little about what has been your personal takeaway from your family legacy, and that's something that you would always cherish all your life, and you know, you would want to even probably teach your children, or they would take as a legacy from you.
Sure. I think, you know, just diving into it, and I think this would be the case with anyone. I think I just, you know, to diving into the history is I find absolutely fascinating. You know, I didn't kind of consider myself a historian before, but I just loved it. And you know, the history of jewelry, in a way, is a history of the world, because you're following the wealth and the power. You know, so you're following where the revolutions are and the wars are and what happens after that. So I find that really fascinating, and I think it's very humbling to understand, to kind of place yourself in the context of such a large history as well, and to realize what went before, and you know, what great people went before. And I think it's very helpful as well when you find yourself in difficult times like the lockdown, you know, which is scary. And you know, at the beginning we no one really understood it, and the future's uncertain, and of course we're worried about their jobs, and it is a scary time. And I'm not belittling that, but also to see it in the context of kind of our ancestors who went through the First World War, you know, who were sending off their sons aged 18 to, you know, to the front line, and then, you know, sleeping. You know, I've got one letter from one of my kind of, I don't know, ancestors who was pregnant, 5 months pregnant, and she was kind of hiding out in the south of France. But she had to kind of sleep with a gun with her head, you know, in her hand under her pillow. in case, because there
Wow.
were kind of fighter pilots kind of coming down in the night, and didn't know if anyone would come in. So I mean, it just puts it all in kind of quite a lot of perspective. So that I found really, I just think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from the past, and I think, yeah, we could all have that. But also in terms of kind of specific things, I found that, so I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and this is just one of the traits I kind of always berated myself for, because I'm so indecisive. I always want everything to be the best possible, so I can never make a decision, and it takes me ages to do anything. And I kind of get cross with myself. But then looking at my ancestors, who are obviously also perfectionists, you know, they were, I'm sure, demanding bosses and difficult to work for. But the flip side of that was they created wonderful things that have, you know, withstood the test of time, and they still break records at auction. And so that kind of perfectionist streak is something that can be great, you know. So I'm kind of slightly less cross with myself about it now. I can kind of see the benefits of, but it's interesting looking at your ancestors, because you do see your own characteristics within them sometimes, you know. So that's interesting, and also to have children myself as well. Yes, I often laugh, and like, you know, I told you that never copy, only create motto. So now it's the kind of motto that my children are forever saying back to me whenever I can't remember an example, but they're often saying, "No, Mom, never copy, only create."
And that is so sweet. So talking about perfection, I remember reading, when I was reading the book, that's especially in fact for the jewelers also, I must tell them that I think your family was very, very particular about the way even the jewelry boxes were made, like particular to a level where even the click of closing the box or opening it had to be very precise and particular. Can you tell the audience a little about that?
Yeah, so my grandfather was known for that. So he was a real, he wanted everything to be perfect. And these were actually, no, but these were like the gold, like, for example, a gold cigarette box. Even before it, so there's lots of elements to make a box, a gold cigarette box. But even before all the engraving happened, you know, all the really delicate bejeweled work, they just had to make a perfect box, you know, and a box that, and that was where the real engineering was, you know, because these jewelers were kind of engineers as well, really. And that's the part my grandfather used to always say, you know, before they started working on the enameling or adding the jewels or engraving, he used to always check that it went, you know, click, and it made just the right tone click. He said to me, "You have to hear the air escaping."
Wow.
Yeah, that's what he wanted. And if he didn't, it was kind of sent back and improved and made again. I actually spoke to a craftsman who had been an apprentice under him recently, and I said to him, he must have been so difficult to work for. And this gentleman said, "Oh, no, it was wonderful. Like, to feel like you're working for someone who's aspiring to that level of perfection, to that level of greatness." You know, he's like, none of us minded. We always just wanted to please him. We wanted to make it perfect. So, and he said it kind of inspired them, you know, even later on when they went off on their different careers, they were always aspiring to that level of greatness, because that's what they'd been taught as an apprentice. So, yeah, the legacy that lives on.
But I think that's something very important for, in fact, all the jewelers who are watching here, or people who are in the service industry where they sell any sort of products, that even the packaging has so much emphasis, and it's just not about the jewelry or the product you're selling. And talking about that, I see a question from the audience asking, how much credit do you give to the Maharajahs, kings of India, for the success of Cartier?
Well, that's a really interesting one. I think they were enormous clients. And also, I mean, I think obviously it was in the days before social media, but they were brilliant at effectively doing what social media does today. So, for example, the Maharajah of Patiala, Cartier created the most phenomenal collection of jewels for him, mainly from his own jewels, mainly from his own gems, right? So he wasn't buying a lot of gems from Cartier. So the margins for Cartier weren't actually that enormous. But they took them 3 years, and they designed this enormous collection, including the famous Patiala necklace with the kind of the big De Beers diamond as big as a golf ball. And what he did was he allowed Cartier Paris to show that collection in their Rue de la Paix windows, you know, well, in their kind of exhibition in 13 Rue de la Paix. And that exhibition attracted the kind of rich and famous from all over the world. You know, you had the kind of the royals coming, you had JP Morgan, the banker, coming from America. Everyone came to admire the Maharajah of Patiala's jewels, which was great for the Maharajah, who wanted to make a name for himself in the West. And it was wonderful for Cartier to be associated with this kind of exotic man of the East, as a, you know, the Maharajahs were really the VIPs of the day. So I think they were really important for, you know, for that, for kind of building the image as much as for the business. And then, of course, they were also important because they gave Jack, my great-grandfather, the ideas for, I mean, so he writes a lot in his diaries about the colours they wear and how they're so, there's so much going on in their outfits, and it's so wonderful to look at them. And then he comes back and he designs like jewels like this, like, I don't know if you can see.
Oh,
but
wow.
These are just pins. I love the way they're done. They're kind of lots of different pins all on the same sheet, but and you can just see the kind of colours he uses, all inspired by those Maharajahs and inspired by India. So I don't think you can really underestimate the importance of India in terms of like the inspiration, the kind of building the brand awareness, the commissions. And also during the Great Depression, when the West was, you know, people in the West just didn't have money to buy big jewels anymore, but the Indians were still spending. So, yeah, big impact on the firm.
Okay, so I want to talk a little about the book right now. So this is from yeah. So when you've written this interesting book, I know it's taken you a lot of years, but there would have been some sort of challenges you faced while writing the book. Can you tell us a little about that and how did you overcome them?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was just and I didn't realize this at the beginning, I don't think, or when I said to my grandfather I would do it, was just like how big a project it was, because it's like 1819 the founder was born, up until, you know, Grandpa sold in 1974. I was born just soon after that. And so that is a lot of history. And especially because I didn't just want to do the Cartiers, I wanted to do the Grandpa felt it was really important that this book shone a light on what he called the unsung heroes, like the craftsmen, the designers, the salesmen, the jewelry dealers, all these experts in their field who, you know, spent years training and dedicated their lives to the firm and have been hidden in the shadows because Cartier, as all the jewelers really back then, had a policy of just naming, you know, signing a jewel Cartier. You didn't sign it with the designer's name or the craftsman. That was just the way it was. But he felt it was right that they should be acknowledged as well. So then I went to go and interview their families, and I found out how much, you know, the firm had meant to them. And those families have become like extended, you know, family to me now. And I'm like, I mean, unfortunately, because of lockdown, I can't. I was meant to be last weekend visiting one of those families and meant to be going off next month to visit another one, just as friends now. So that was wonderful. But it also did mean I ended up with this huge amount of material, as well as the letters, all these interviews, and then all the history books I read. So that was quite a challenge in terms of, you asked me the challenge for the book, it's just in terms of being quite overwhelmed with the amount of material I had to write. But then I kind of just took a step back and thought, why, you know, I'm doing this because I'm fascinated by it, and because also I promised my grandfather I would. And so that just, you know, kept me going. And I just took it chapter by chapter, you know, and yeah, just did it in the end. But it's never going to be totally complete. There's always going to be more.
I in fact remember when we met in 2017, you also said that, you know, it's hats off to your children, where, you know, they're giving you all the time to let you write the book and not disturb you with any of that.
Yes. And even now, they're like, Mom, the book's meant to be over and you're shoving us out of the house and we're not like, Insta lives and webinars. I'm like, what?
I can imagine, I know. So moving forward, let's get into the audience Q&A. We have so many questions coming up from people. I have this one interesting one, which is asking about in today's times, who you think would have been the most successful or influential, Louis, Pierre, or Jack?
Oh, that's interesting. Do you know what? I think that's really interesting. I think Pierre was a brilliant businessman and brilliant at marketing. So maybe he would have absolutely loved all this kind of the internet and the new methods to market, you know? Louis was an artist and Jack was more of an artist and a businessman. So, you know, whereas they would have, you know, create beautiful things. I think the reason they worked so well together is because you had the artist creating beautiful things, but then you had the business who was the businessman, the business mind to kind of sell them and market them. And that's why it was such a magic combination. You know, if you just had any one of the brothers, you may well have not have heard of Cartier today. You know, you kind of needed them all. So I think that probably remains true, actually.
Okay. Moving forward, are the Cartier family in any way contributing to the business now, although ownership has passed on?
Yeah, no, so my grandfather was the last Cartier who managed and owned a branch of the firm. So he ran the London branch until 1974. And after that, it was sold out to the family.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any exclusive Cartier pieces that hasn't been given to the auctions or to any museums?
Yeah, of course, we've got pieces in the family. But, you know, I mean, exclusive. I mean, that's what also interested me when I spoke to my grandfather. He's like, you know, almost the majority of pieces that he made and his ancestors made were for commission. They weren't for stock back then. So, you know, 60-70% of what they made were for commission. And they were all unique, you know, because you would never give one lady the same necklace that her neighbor might have sitting next to her. Everything was totally unique. So I found this really amazing because it's not the world we've been brought up in, is it? But when you walked into 175 New Bond Street, every piece there, apart from maybe the tank watches, you know, because that was an ongoing model, but would be a unique piece because he said it was based on the stones you'd bought that week. You know, you may make an owl brooch one week and then someone else asked for an owl brooch, but you don't have the right stone. You have an opal, so you make a kingfisher one the next week, or whatever. So, or if you have two perfect rubies, maybe you'll make earrings. But if you only have one, you'll use it for a ring. And he said you don't just design a piece out of nowhere. You need it. You do it based on what you have. So yeah, that's interesting.
Can you speak about the mystery clocks? I love that part of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I need to kind of do a webinar on mystery clocks or something because they're so fascinating.
Oh wow!
So like I mean, basically, Louis had this idea to create these mystery clocks, and the mystery was that they were a clock, 1920s mainly, but you couldn't see the workings in them, so you could see entirely through the dial, and so the mystery was how on earth did they work. And he worked very closely with Maurice Couet, a master clockmaker of the time. This is another thing about Louis. Just because he wasn't a clockmaker and he didn't understand mechanics, it didn't stop him. He just found the best clockmaker in Paris and was like, right, we're working together. And he came up with this idea and he said, I want you to do this. And it wasn't a totally new idea, something like that. There's been similar ideas. Basically, he wanted the mystery clock. Some of them are resting on figurines, like a jade fish or something like that. And the idea for that had, you know, come from ideas of clocks in the 18th century, but he was adapting it and he wanted to make it these mystery clocks. And he told, you know, so he said to the clockmaker, you've got to do it in this way. And he said to the designers, I want you to work closely with the clockmaker because clearly the designers had to understand the mechanics in order to design the piece. And they did it. And apparently the first one took a whole year to make, because Louis was never happy with the final, never happy with the result, and he kept sending it back and saying, no, this isn't what I expected. Try again, until it was done. And one of the first models sold to J.P. Morgan actually. But I love what my grandfather told me, which was that even the salesmen in Cartier weren't told how the mystery clock worked, what the mystery was, because it was so important that they kind of transferred their own sense of wonder to the client, you know, and only then would the client get so excited. And it was a real secret, you know, it really was for decades.
Wow.
Great. Yeah. And now, I mean, there are different types of mystery clocks. The Model A, which is the more simple one, and then later on they did the figurine ones, which I was saying. And when they come up with auctions on those, I mean, they go for insane sums because they are such works of art, you know. They're works of mechanical art, which, you know, or works of engineering and mechanics, which and they're beautiful, and it was that kind of, so Louis felt very important that, like, felt that it was very important for watches as well as for clocks, for practical items, that you should combine form and function, right? It's no good having a beautiful object that didn't work perfectly, or having a perfect object that didn't look beautiful. So for the watch, you know, he added a sapphire winder, and he made sure that the strap was totally kind of part of the design of, like, the tank. The whole point about the tank is that the strap fits in perfectly to the case. So it looks like one beautiful object, and it's not like a chunky pocket watch attached to the strap, which is what had been done, attached to the wrist, which is what some other jewelers had done in the past. So I think the mystery clocks kind of really show that in a phenomenal way. So yeah, they're fascinating. We really need images. Next time I'll do something with images. And then you can see
I think, in fact, you must also do a live on mystery clocks. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
So I see a question in the audience asking about what sets Katya apart from any other luxury brand.
I don't know if I'm the most objective person to answer that question, you know. I mean, there were lots of, well, what was interesting actually is, you know, okay, there was, and I don't think this is exclusive to Cartier, there were some, you know, very high-end jewelers who the focus on creativity, innovation, craftsmanship was incredibly high. And I think Cartier was amongst those, definitely. But I also think what's interesting from my research is that those jewelers were often friends, and they often kind of married within each other as well. Like, so on the birth of my grandfather, in fact, I found a telegram, like, written from the Van Cleef and the Arpels family, saying, "Congratulations, you finally have a son, you know, to carry on the Cartier name." And they're so pleased that the Cartiers have got an heir. You know, there's not jealousy or envy. They're all in it together. You know, they're this group of kind of jewelers catering to an elite. They're not part of the elite, by the way. The jewelers weren't. Nowadays, you may have a kind of fashion designer or a big jeweler kind of hosting the big party, or the VIP at the party. But back then, the jewelers were the salesmen. You know, there was a kind of snobbery attached. There's certainly my great-grandfather, his father-in-law didn't want him to marry my great-grandmother because he felt he was kind of trade, he was beneath her. So there was definitely a sense that, you know, the jewelers were kind of part of the same class, and they were friendly. Yeah, a bit of healthy rivalry sometimes between Cartier and Fabergé in Russia. There was the odd incident where kind of Louis Cartier got arrested at one point. I write about it in my diary. But generally they got along well.
Oh, that's so interesting. So this is the last question I'm taking for today. Did your grandfather meet Wallis Simpson or Elizabeth Taylor?
My great-grandfather, yes, because this is really interesting actually. So Wallis Simpson, so the Duke of Windsor, before he became the Duke of Windsor, he was about to become king, and he was in and out of Cartier London all the time. He'd always come in the back entrance so no one would recognise him. And he was always buying jewels for Wallis in there. You know, they weren't engaged yet, and she was still married to someone else, Mr. Simpson. But he was often buying jewels for her, and you know, he even bought her engagement ring for my great-grandfather. And my great-grandfather told the story of that ring. It's an enormous emerald ring. Emeralds are quite unusual for an engagement ring because they're fragile. But the Duke of Windsor didn't mind that. He wanted this special ring. And the story behind this ring, I mean, I write about it in my book, but one of Jack, my great-grandfather's salesman, had gone off to Baghdad to buy some jewels. And when he was in Baghdad, he'd telegraphed back to my great-grandfather saying, I need more money. There are some incredible, you know, there's an incredible thing I can buy here. I need more money. So Jack had trusted his salesman and said, okay, I'll, you know, wire you the money.
Yeah.
And he did so, and then he was excitedly and waiting for the salesman's return to see this big case of jewels that the salesman would bring back with him. And yet when the salesman arrived, he brought out of his pocket one single black pouch. That was it. And Jack was like, what? All that money for that? And out of the pouch, he pulled an emerald the size of a bird's egg, he said.
Wow.
The problem was, this was in like the early 1930s, and Jack was kind of delighted because he'd loved gems and he'd never seen anything like this, but also appalled because he knew he would never be able to sell it because the Romanovs were no longer, buying after the Russian Revolution. It was the great years of the Great Depression. He was like, what am I going to do? So he ended up cutting the stone in half. And he sold half to an American businessman, and the other half he sold to the Duke of Windsor, and that became Wallis Simpson's engagement ring. Which she then wore for the rest of her life. And on her 20th wedding anniversary, actually, she updated it. So he made it on a very simple platinum setting in 1937, and she, in 1957, I think it was, updated it to a gold setting with diamonds as well, framing them out. But yeah, you can Google that. They sold it at auction. Was it a Sotheby's auction?
Yeah, someone's mentioning here, which sold at astonishing $800,000 in the auction.
You've got the value of the stone, but you've also got that incredible heritage. Not only Wallis Simpson, but also that great story from Jack about how it had been the size of a bird's egg and come back, and such a great story. That's why I got really into this, writing this book, because it's all the stories behind the jewels. I mean, yes, the stories of my ancestors, but it's the clients, and you go into all their lives as well. What's fascinating was he was buying that emerald engagement ring, and it was that ring he would effectively change the course of British history, right? Because it meant that he would have become king. It meant that the next year, instead of his coronation, his brother would be crowned on the same day that he was meant to be crowned. And Cartier would be making 27 tiaras for the coronation, but it wouldn't be his coronation. He'd be in France getting married to the Duchess of Windsor. So yeah, loved all that.
That's such an amazing story. So, Francesca, one last message for everybody out here and people who are in the gems and jewelry trade.
That never copy, only create motto is, I do think, a really great one for so many parts of the business. Yes, for the design and the creative part, but also just for the way you do business and the way you adapt, and just the way that you were doing it, before this whole pandemic broke out. And that may not be working anymore in this world, but just it's the idea of that I realized through all those letters, that they were just continually innovating, whether it was marketing methods, the way they advertised, the way they bought stones, the way they came up with designs, the way that, in a difficult environment, they didn't stop making jewels. They just stopped making a lot of very, very high-end jewels. So they used semi-precious stones instead of precious stones, or they used gold instead of platinum, or, so that people could afford their products. So yeah, I think that just idea of adapting and, not getting stuck in a rut, but thinking of ways around the problem.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for all your time, and it's been wonderful chatting with you and meeting you virtually this time until we meet again in person. So thanks a lot for your time, and please give my regards to your family, and everybody stay safe, stay healthy, stay indoors.
Thanks, Prernaa. Bye-bye.
Thank you everybody for signing in today and giving all your time. Thank you. Namaste from India.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So the Cartiers is available on Amazon in an ebook format, a paperback format, and also an audible format. Yes, so I have in fact read the entire book and also heard the entire book on Audible, and I would like to read a very interesting message that Francesca wrote for me during the Mumbai book signing event that I hosted for her. For Prernaa, with all my thanks for organizing such a wonderful event and at such a short notice. You are a marvel. With very best wishes, F. Cartier Brickell, 28 Jan 2020. Thank you, Francesca, for this wonderful book and this wonderful message. Thank you once again.